Welcome to Healthcare IT Today. I'm John Lynn, together with my colleague and friend, Colin. The world of technology and healthcare are ever-changing in new and novel ways, and that's why we love this stuff. So join us as we discuss the latest healthcare and health IT news, meshed together in new ways, which help generate ideas and new perspectives. Plus, we'll have a little fun along the way. On today's episode, we'll be discussing whether you should trust Google or really any vendor with patient data. It's a rip from the headlines topic as we discovered that Ascension Health has been sharing data with Google. So a lot of discussion happening with that, and hopefully we can share some insight and perspective. Be sure to follow the show on Twitter at the hashtag HITSM and our personal accounts at TechGuy and at Colin_Hung. Plus, check out our 13 years of health IT blog content at healthcareittoday.com. Do you trust Google, Colin?
That's a good question. I actually do. I have to say I actually do trust them. I trust them as much as any other vendor who has a lot of data. So I have to say that I think Google is probably doing an okay job. Which actually
I'm not sure I trust them, but I've given up. I just assume that they're going to have it. So that gives you, it's good that we start with that perspective. Like, where do we come from? You're a very trusting person, and I've just assumed they're going to have it, and I live my life as if anything bad could happen.
Well, I just think, certainly I think there's a lot of attention being given to it right now because it's in the news, and it does seem a little bit nefarious, I guess you can say. But of all the companies to pick on, I would have to say that I think Google is probably one of the least of our worries. Sure, they have a lot of our data, and they probably have a lot of capability to use it. But there are many, many more shady organizations than Google. Right?
Well, and I think it goes back to they have so many revenue streams available to them. Like, why do they want to use health data to screw us over with an insurance company? That's not good for their brand, right? When they have so many other ways that they can make money and that the margins are so much better. Yeah, I'm with you, right? Like, there's plenty of other organizations that don't have the revenue streams that Google has and the potential revenue streams that Google doesn't want to do that, where it's really going to damage their reputation because their reputation is worth more. Whereas some other people don't have a reputation or already have a bad reputation.
Yeah, and there was a question a lot of people have been asking, especially I'm here at this conference. Is this legal? Is this is this something that Google could have done or should have been doing? And my thought was, look, I'm pretty sure that Google had a BAA with Ascension, right? So they are covered. They are covered under HIPAA, and so this is technically, in my mind, this is legal. Right? They followed the rule. It's not like they broke a rule. There's nothing that says someone has to disclose that they're using this information. And they had a BAA in place to say, look, if this ever was breached, they accept the risk. And they, again, out of all the companies that this could happen to, I would say that, I lump them all together. Microsoft, Amazon's, Apple's of the world. These guys are spending money on cybersecurity, probably more than anybody else. And so, do I trust them? I think I would trust them more than all these other organizations that are a little bit more shady, who are using it maybe to, just solely for advertising purposes. So relatively speaking, I do trust Google in this context.
Well, and we should probably cover that for those that haven't stayed on top of the news. Basically, Ascension Health has given, it seems like it's the full EHR record, or at least the full medical record for a patient. I just saw some early reports that said that at least 20 million records had been transferred from Ascension to Google, and that there were 30 million more on the docket to go as well. So imagine 50 million patient records. It's not surprising that some people are scared by this, right? But it goes back to the question of, is it legal? Well, it turns out that the business associate agreements, the BAA, as you said, allow for this to happen. In fact, that's what's happening when you have an electronic health record. How many records does Epic store or Cerner store in their data centers? Millions and millions of records.
Right.
and we trust them to do it. So it's interesting that people are all up, in a little tizzy, right, about, well, Google has that data. And, fair enough. Some people have argued that we've seen the history of Google and their decision to use whatever data they have available to increase their marketing platform, which that's what Google is, right? It's a marketing platform. That they're going to use this data that way. But their business associate agreement could preclude them from doing that. I think the bigger challenge also is that if they de-identify the data, then they could use it for marketing and for the other parts of Google. That gets into a whole nother discussion. Can you de-identify data and whatnot? But if they have the identified data, that is considered protected health information, and they're bound by HIPAA. But if they de-identify it, they could use it in other tools and other solutions.
Yeah, and I think that goes to, I guess, why there's a little bit more of, attention being put on this is, of course, Google's capabilities, right?
Yeah.
They're one of the few companies on the planet that can actually take de-identified information and re-identify you, right? Just based on all the other information they have about you. So they are in a unique position in that people don't believe it when they say, well, I'm using de-identified information to do X or to do Y. You compare that to, as you just said, the amount of records that someone like Epic has. They have just as many, probably even more records in their systems. They could use de-identified and probably are using de-identified information to train their AI, to test their new products and those kinds of things, yet no one makes a big deal out of it. Why? Because Epic is not in the business of selling you ads, right? They're not in the business of providing you an email client and all those kinds of things. But fundamentally, and I guess in the legal world, they are the same in the sense of they have the same access to the information. They are bound by the same rules. They have the same kind of a relationship with the end user, in this case being the hospitals. Yet one is in the public eye, and the other, and now getting the ire, and the other one isn't, right?
Well,
At least
and
not
that's
for that.
interesting you said the ire, because Facebook's obviously suffered the ire for the longest time, and Google was more of a trusted source. And now it's amazing how that trust just erodes so quickly. In fact, when you look at it, the real question shouldn't be, is it legal? The real question I think many people should be asking is, should it be legal to do what they're doing? And I actually think it is. I'm of the opinion that it should be. We could have a discussion of provenance of de-identified data. That's, I think, a harder question. But should they be allowed? I mean, what did we just say? What are we saying? We're saying, should Ascension be allowed to work with really smart people at Google to solve some really challenging problems with EHR data and how it's displayed and how it's evaluated and how it's given to the clinicians to be able to reduce their cognitive load, to reduce physician burnout? Like, that sounds like a really good thing that healthcare really needs. I don't know how many people have come on healthcareittoday.com and said, man, I wish Apple would build an EHR. Well, Google's doing some of it. Like, they're not building a full EHR, but they're working with them and trying to solve some of these problems that vex healthcare. And so I guess I think we should encourage this and not be upset. I think how they did it and how they announced it could be problematic, but for the most part, I think this is a good thing, and people are making a big molehill out of nothing. So,
yeah, I agree with you. I think if you put this to if you put this to patients or put this to people up front and say, hey, we want to use this data not just to improve your life, but to improve the lives of future patients, to improve the life and livelihood of physicians, and improve the delivery of care. Hey, would you agree to this? I think most people would go, yeah, sure, right? Like, sign me up. I think it's the fact that, of course, they didn't do this up front, or they weren't made aware of it. It does have that sort of feel of negativity or nefariousness when you it comes out in the light, right, later on. But like we've been talking about, it is a perfectly legal framework, and the reasons why they were doing it, in my mind, are legitimate, right? There's nothing that they've done wrong other than it's a PR nightmare for them right now. So
can you imagine being the PR person?
Yeah,
And that's where it goes to the more challenging question, right? Okay, is it legal? That's a legal thing, and we can work through that. But the real question is, what's going to be the impact on Google of this? Because is it morally wrong that Ascension is sharing 20 million patient records without letting the patients know? And should the law be changed to do that? Should there be some sort of notification rule? And is this going to impact Google, where they're, they're taking a lot of egg on the face right now, and I think that's going to make a lot of people a little bit careful in Google Health. I saw an interesting comment from someone on Twitter who said, "Hey, they have a former FDA exec, they have a former ONC chair, they have a former CIO, CEO. Like, why aren't they putting them out front and saying, hey, will you be the face of this?" And say, hey, we're not breaking any laws. But, they haven't done that. And, I'm not sure if I were those people, I'd want to be the face of it either. But no doubt, I mean, this is the challenge. So what do you think? Do you think the impact's going to be harsh on Google? Is it going to damage their reputation?
I think maybe in the short term, people will not trust Google as much. However, I just think, much like Amazon's and the Facebooks, it's so ingrained in our day-to-day lives that long-term, I don't think there's going to be a huge ripple for Google. If anything, I think it's actually going to have more of an impact on how they move forward in this sort of world. I think what's happening is that people are now realizing that trust is different than the law, right? Having the trust of the public, having the trust of your customers is different than what's legal, because the legal framework lags way, way, way behind the trusted, right? So I think what I hope Google and others and Facebooks of the world will take from this is, look, just be transparent. There's nothing wrong with what you did, but just be upfront about it. So why not tout this and say, hey, we're working with Ascension to do this. And yes, you may have to provide a mechanism and say, hey, if you don't want your identified data to be part of this, well, then click this button. Hey, but guess what? What we're using is de-identified data, so don't worry, right? Like I think if they had done that, then it's just a simple statement, probably would have flown under everyone's radar. And then when it did hit,
no one would have opted out. There would have been 150 people of 20 million that opt out.
Exactly. This is the same thing with what happens with 23andMe and all these other things. It's in the rider, right? And when you click it, it's like, well, I've already accepted it, so it says that they can go and sell it. So what have I got to complain about? I clicked the dang thing, right? So I think
it reminds me of? It reminds me of steroids in sports, right? So if you look at steroids in baseball, who are the people that did steroids? Alex Rodriguez, who interestingly enough is going to be keynote at HIMSS, right? The other Andy Pettit, right? Did steroids, and he copped to it. He said, "Hey, I did it," and they finally said it. But then and we've forgiven him. As Americans, I don't know how it is for Canadians, but as Americans, we want to forgive people, right? If they just own it and then say, hey, I screwed up or whatever, right? And then we forgive them. But if you look at it, like Roger Clemens, right? He still has never admitted to doing it. Barry Bonds never admitted to doing it. And so because they didn't, they're going to be castigated forever and they aren't allowed to do anything. And so it's like, I think it's kind of a similar situation. It will be interesting to see how Google and even Ascension responds, because how they respond will determine how the public responds to them.
Yeah, I think so. And I think this is an opportunity for Google, like I thought it was an opportunity for Facebook and other people, where you can turn this negative into, okay, a realization that you have to be more transparent. So in my mind, this is really a discussion around transparency. If Google had been more transparent or is more transparent going forward, I think their impact of this will be very negative and be very short. I think, however, if they kind of stick with it was legal and therefore we were perfectly within our rights, I think then they're in for a more protracted, a negative period where people are just going to be like, what's Google really doing? But the reality is, again, like, these tools that we use are so ingrained in our day-to-day lives. I doubt anyone's going to suddenly decide, oh, you know what? I'm not going to use Google anymore. I'm going to get off Gmail and do something else. Like, it's not practical.
They're going to move to DuckDuckGo for their searches now.
right, or Bing, right? Like, no offense to Microsoft, but there's not a lot of alternatives out there. So I think there's going to be some protest and some tarnish. Hopefully, it's a lesson learned for them. But I think long-term, the impact's going to be pretty negative.
I think the impact, actually, I agree with you completely as far as the Google brand and Google searches and Gmail and all in G Suite and everything like that. But I think when it comes from how they roll it out, it's going to have a huge impact. In fact, it may actually make them gun shy with healthcare because of these types of things. And so I'll be interested to see if, I can already see the press releases coming out from any next effort. They're going to be so transparent and so above, what they needed to do to say what they were doing because they want to avoid this Ascension type incident again.
It's going to be like the commercials we see on TV for drugs, right? There's that long scrolling list of, we could use this data for this and for that, and
we may use your data for this, and we may use your data for that, and we will not use your data for marketing, and we will not use your data for marketing. But you may get constipation while
exactly
while listening to this.
Stop using Google immediately should these symptoms occur, right?
If these symptoms occur, do not go to Google, go to your doctor.
Anyway, hey, listen, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Healthcare IT Today with John Lynn and Colin Hung. Please take a minute to check out the Healthcare IT Today archives on healthcareittoday.com. Plus, please, we'd really appreciate it if you'd rate and review wherever you're listening to this episode. We really appreciate 5 stars, but of course 4 stars are just as good. But please give us your honest opinions so that we can improve. We also love it when listeners provide us feedback directly on the show via Twitter or via email. And again, our Twitter handles are @TechGuy, that's John, and for me it's @Colin_Hung. So John, we talked about the impact that this was going to have potentially on Google. What's the potential impact you think this will have on Ascension?
I mean, I wonder if it's going to have a kind of ripple effect that many healthcare organizations are going to be afraid to work with other vendors. And I'm sure Ascension's going to be afraid. They're going to be like, man, was this the right choice? Because if you look at it from the Ascension perspective, they were essentially saying, and there's 3 parts to this as I understand it, and it's early, we're still getting a lot of details, but they were going to move all their infrastructure to the Google Cloud. So that was one element. No one cares about that. Let's be honest. I mean, they care about it, right? And the industry cares, but patients don't care about that so much. Then they also moved to G Suite for their email, calendaring, et cetera, right? So those are the 2 elements that everyone's like, okay, that's fine, that's normal, that's what everyone's doing with Google. But then the third one was the data. And from their perspective, Ascension was saying, hey, we have this problem that we need to solve, and could we partner with Google to solve that problem? I mean, I think their intent was good. I can't imagine there's some sort of, and we'll see when all the details come out, was there some sort of financial agreement that they're making millions of dollars off Google? Maybe they got some free cloud hosting or something in return for this exchange, but I don't think this was on the Ascension's part an evil act to try to use their data inappropriately. They followed, it seems like, all of the legal guidelines to protect it and ensure that the data was used in a way that would help them better serve the patients. So unfortunately, I have a feeling it's going to make them quite gun shy with any future efforts, and I think they'll be very careful in how they do it, which is a little unfortunate because I think we do need the partnerships between the tech giants, if you will, and healthcare providers like Ascension to really move things forward.
Yeah, I think if anything, this unfortunately will put a pause or a damper on a lot of these types of agreements, which will only serve to slow down the pace of innovation. Now, some would argue me that's okay. I would argue that you're putting up barriers that really shouldn't exist. But I think on the flip side, what it will do for Ascension, I think it'll make, like what it will do for Google, it'll make them more transparent going forward. I think they will have to be more forthcoming on, here's how I'm going to use the data. And as an organization, I just think that's just wise as a business practice, right? The more transparent you are, the more trusted you're going to be, and the more trusted you're going to be, the more people are going to choose you, right? So I think it's going to be a good thing in the long term. I think the impact is really a process impact in the sense of some new policies, some new procedures around, okay, guys, like we really got to make sure when we get involved with a company like a Google or an IBM or a Microsoft, let's really understand what's going to happen with that data, and let's map that out and make sure we all understand it and are comfortable with it. And then, by the way, we're going to disclose that now. And hopefully that's the outcome.
I mean, I kind of hate that though, right? I mean, that I understand that's why they're getting hammered, right? It's because this was called Project Nightingale. If it was called a healthcare analytics project focused on sepsis, no one would have been like, oh, what is this sneaky thing that Google's trying to do with Ascension, right? I mean, the fact that it was called Project Nightingale is, part of why people are freaking out is like, what are you doing in Project Nightingale, right? If they'd been specific, then they would have. But if you have to be specific, then you're almost killing innovation from the beginning. Because it sounds like Ascension and Google were saying, hey, we don't know where this is going to go, but as Google has some really smart people and Ascension has some great clinical people and a lot of data. Can we marry them together and discover something? I mean, it's Christopher Columbus discovering that America exists rather than, oh, we already know America's there and can we create a ship to get there, right? I mean, I think that's the comparison, and that's what I hate about the idea of like, we have to be so prescriptive about what we're going to do with it when, yeah, we want the smart people at Google discovering new insights that we didn't even expect from the data that are going to improve the patient's lives. So that's where, I mean, I understand why people are scared because it's this, code name. And Google even said that, I think, in their announcement. They said it was a code name because we aren't sure yet what we're going to discover from it. And
Right.
so, I just don't want to damper that discovery that could happen.
I'm with you there, but I think in over time it won't. I mean, I look at it as very similar to what you have to do in order to put up a new condo building in your local municipality, right? There has to be some public hearing that happens. People, you have to invite the residents to come and offer an opinion. And if you've ever gone to one, like I've gone to one in my life, there's like 10 people that show up, right? Like 10 people that show up, and usually 5 of them are the same people that go to all these things.
Yep.
Meaning that they're local real estate agents, or they're somehow involved, they're councilmen or councilwomen, and no one cares, right? And I think unfortunately this is what's going to happen down the road, is that you're going to have these opt-in or opt-out options. It's going to be like a period of disclosure that, hey, we're about to go into this Project Nightingale, and you have a 30-day period to opt out, and then no one will, right? Or 80% people will be in. And to me, Google and others will go, okay, 80% is still great. It's still enough data to do my work with. Exactly. So I think it'll hopefully just become, well, I just got to do this, and it's the right thing to do. And I think just by human nature, we'll get lazy and just go, okay, well, unless it's for some really nefarious thing, I'm not really it's going to fly under my radar, right?
Yep.
But I think that's the piece that people are getting most upset about, is like, hey, you didn't ask me. But I look at that other industry and look at the condo and the building code industry and go, well, we asked you there, and like most people don't care, right? But we're making this entire industry go do this because the alternative is this, right? Which is not good. So we'll all put up with putting on these, meetings and then putting these notice boards up on where the building is going to go. And anyway, I see that as a very analogous to where we are here.
Yeah, you can already see it happening. That's a great analysis.
Yeah. Let's get to our last question, John, before we have to wrap up. We could spend all day talking about this topic. So is data sharing without our knowledge something that we should just get used to?
I mean, I guess this is where we started. I've already gotten used to it. So I guess you know where I stand, right? I think the data is going to be shared. I think we should, push for policies around transparency of when it's being shared and how it's being shared. And I think that's a good thing. And I think that we should push for more of those opportunities. I don't know if it's legislation's the right, and I think we should push companies and hold them accountable when they're not, and they should be transparent, because if you're not doing something nefarious, you should be okay to share it and let people know. So I think we should focus on transparency as much as possible, but I think as a patient, I have to assume that things are going to be shared. And anyway, that's my own default take. It's like I might as well enjoy the benefits if I think it's going to happen anyways. And there's certainly risk involved, and I think the legislation will go around those risks. But I think it's just life. Data is going to be shared.
Yeah, I think anyone who gauges online knows that eventually that data is going to come back or be used or be mined, or it's going to be useful to somebody. So someone's keeping it and tracking it. Should we be happy about it? The answer is no, but I think it's a trade-off, right? What are you getting in return for giving up that piece of privacy or that piece of yourself? And if you're happy making that trade at that moment, then I would say, yeah, you know what, this is the consequence of it. Now, should we be happy with a breach or someone using it for a not so good method? No, absolutely not. But, I think data is just something that we generate so much of, and we willingly trade that off, that I think we should get used to this happening.
Yeah, I think the irony someone pointed out is that they were able to have 30 million records be interoperable, but yet I can't transfer an image from one hospital across the street to another hospital. So I think that goes back to, well, what's the real interoperability problem? It's a business problem. It's not a technical problem.
I think that's proof right there, John. Absolutely. Hey, listen, that brings us to another close of another episode of Healthcare IT Today. Thank you for all of you who tuned in. Please, to find out more details about our show, just go to the programs page on healthcarenowradio.com and share your voice and engage with the community at healthcareittoday.com and on Twitter using the hashtag HITSF. I'm Colin Hung, and that's my friend John Lynn. Thanks for watching this episode, and have a great week.